Hello and welcome. My name is Sara Harberson and I'm America's college counselor. Thanks so much for joining me on this rapid fire Facebook Live Q&A. And this is a special edition for underclassmen students, so freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, and parents of freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. This Facebook Live is special for you. If you have questions about the admissions process, I'm going to be answering them live. So what you need to do is type your question into the comment section below the live feed. And I should mention that we are streaming live on both of my Facebook pages for Sara Harberson and also Admissions Revolution. You can always access my Facebook Lives, whether you go to my Facebook pages or one of my websites, admissionsrevolution.com or saraharberson.com. If you are a first-time viewer, I encourage you to give me a shout out, or all those returning viewers as well. Let me know where you're coming from. I love hearing from you, what grade you are in or what grade your child is in and what state you're coming from. If you're coming from overseas, I also love to hear from you. This is an exciting time because right now high school seniors are submitting applications and they're also beginning to hear back from colleges. And so if you follow me on Instagram, every day on my story, I will update you on all the acceptances for my Application Nation Class of 2020 group. And if you want to check that out, follow me at my handle is Sara Harberson. But as much as we are focused a lot on those high school seniors, we can't ignore the fact that it's so important to be thinking about the college admissions process well before senior year. Even starting as a high school freshman, you want to be taking the right classes to allow you to be able to apply to the colleges that you ultimately want to take senior year. So whatever your question is about, whether it's about academics, PSATs, SATs, ACTs, subject tests, you can ask them in the comment section below the live feed. I'm going to be answering as many of them as I can. Those juniors probably took the PSATs in October. You're going to start to hear back about those scores usually right at the beginning of December. So this is a good time to start thinking about when to take official testing like SATs and ACTs for the first time. For those sophomores and freshmen, you are just getting used to the school year. You're figuring out what classes are important to you. What are your favorite classes and activities? A lot of times your activities can give you an indication of what you want to major in college and possibly what you want to do with your life after that. But it looks like we already have a question roll in. It comes in from Jennifer. First question of the day: are some SATs harder than others? My daughter took it twice and did better the first time. Wants competitive school, not Ivy, and is still in the 90th percentile. Should she take it again? All right, so, from hearing from students across the country after every single SAT and ACT, I tend to hear what students are thinking and how they felt about the test that they just took. I think certain tests definitely get a reputation for being harder than others, but that's why I always encourage students to try to take it at least twice, and I would say sometimes even a third time could be helpful. For almost every college and university in the country, they're going to super score the SAT, which means that the college is going to take your highest math score and highest critical reading and writing score, even if it happens on two different dates. So it benefits the student to take it twice. The ACT, it's not as common for colleges to super score the ACT because there are 4 different sections that are usually required. However, ACT did just announce that starting this coming fall, so next fall, for the class of 2021, if a student just wanted to take a section of the ACT, they could. And I think that's going to lead to a lot more colleges and universities super scoring the ACT as well. So that's good news for students. All right, next question coming in from Mark. How to learn how to screen for collaborative versus competitive programs or a college culture. Mark, your question disappeared on me, and this is pretty common with Facebook Live. So I would encourage you, if you ask a question, try to be as succinct as possible because they literally will disappear because so many people are asking questions. But Mark, I think I got your question. When you're looking at colleges, how can you tell if a college culture is collaborative or competitive when you're visiting schools and when you're looking at some? I think Mark had asked this question independently to me, and so I know that his child is looking at computer science classes. I really think that the first step is to go and visit these colleges. There's no way to get a feeling about a college until you walk on that campus, step foot on that campus. So that's the first step. And I would start with the official campus tour and information session. And for colleges and universities that care about demonstrated interest, it's important to do that official campus tour and information session. But that's really just the first step. If your child really enjoys that visit, they can go home and start doing some research. They can look at the website and get a feel for it. But just remember that the tour guide giving the campus tour, the information session is led by an admissions officer, and everything on their website is done by the college. So if you want some independent voices, I would encourage the student to contact anyone they know that goes to that college. Also, it might be helpful to reach out to that specific department and ask to speak to a current student who majors in the field that you want to major in. Also, there are some great websites out there. I'm a big fan of unigo.com, unigo.com, and it is a college site, but it has feedback and opinions from current students going to the different colleges and universities. So I like to check that out to get a real sense of what's going on campus and how the current students feel about their experience, their educational experience, their social, residential, everything and anything is on unigo.com, so check it out. Next question coming in from Melissa. When do you recommend students take the SATs for the first time? Melissa, I was hoping someone would ask this question. Spring sophomore year or fall of junior year? Okay, so here's the scoop. Juniors aren't going to be taking the PSATs until October, fall of junior year. And so unless the student is a naturally strong test taker, I generally recommend that they do test prep over the summer or begin test prep over the summer between sophomore and junior year. That's only going to help them with the PSAT, even though the PSAT scores are never reported to colleges. And then if they are a really strong test taker, and they can tell that by all the practice tests that they're taking over the summer before junior year, they could possibly take the SAT or ACT for the first time fall of junior year. But I think most students need a little extra time. And so taking the PSATs in October, getting back those scores at the beginning of December, and ultimately planning to take the SAT or ACT, I would say in the winter of junior year or very early spring is still going to give the student plenty of opportunities to retake the tests. And I would go into that first test saying, you know what, this is just to get used to that full-length exam. And if the scores aren't where you want them to be, you can always retake them a second time or third time. And there are more dates now than ever. So the ACT is offered in July and also September. That's a really popular time for those high school seniors trying to take the ACT one last time before they apply. For the SAT, it's going to be offered in August, right before senior year, and also October, very popular times for high school seniors. But if you begin to take those tests, I would say winter at the earliest if you're just an average test taker, but obviously you can get it done sooner if you notice that your practice tests are really, really strong and your scores are right where they need to be. All right, next question. Spanish AP test versus the subject test for student who hates tests. All right, good question. So this is an important piece of the puzzle because AP exams are pretty common with those high achieving students. If you're taking an AP class, it's almost assumed that you're going to take the AP exam at the end of the school year. And those AP exams are offered in May. And in some high schools, actually, if the student takes the AP class, they're required to take the AP exam. Here's a little tip and a secret. Even though colleges want to see AP scores, they're technically not required for admission. They can be helpful if you're trying to place out of a class or get into an upper level class when you are a freshman, but they're not required for admission. But in some cases at high schools, you have to take the AP exam. I'd say it's worth it because it definitely does give you a culminating experience, and it can also help you prepare for subject tests. And I would say that if you're taking AP Spanish, let's say junior year, you can take the AP Spanish exam in May, And that's a good jumping off point to consider taking, let's say, the Spanish subject test in June. And I noticed that for some students, they do better on the AP exam than doing well on the subject test, and vice versa. So sometimes giving yourself a couple of options can help you out, because you don't always have to submit all of those tests and all of those scores. Next question, how well does the PSAT 9 indicate how one might do on the actual SAT? So the PSAT 9 is a fairly new exam. It used to be that there was just a PSAT and an SAT, but the College Board has somehow created even more tests. So the PSAT 9 is specifically designed for high school freshmen, and it's scaled accordingly. So it does match up more with what the student has taken in school thus far, and it doesn't expect them to be taking courses that typically a junior or a sophomore would be taking. Frankly, what I see with scores is if a student is just a naturally good test taker, we're going to see signs of that actually even in middle school or even earlier than that. And so they tend to do well on the PSAT 9, and they tend to do well on all tests after that, with obviously some important preparation. It's always key. Even just getting used to taking a long exam is crucial when a student is preparing. So in my experience, a student does well on the PSAT 9, it usually means they're going to do well moving forward on the regular PSAT and the SAT, and possibly even subject tests and the ACT. But you don't have to take all of these tests, by the way. The College Board and the ACT, it might seem like you have to do all this, but colleges have absolutely no preference between the SAT and the ACT. And so students should be taking the tests that they are going to do their best on, and ideally try to pick the right test right from the start. Next question, how necessary are subject matter tests if college doesn't require them? So this, Deborah is asking about subject tests. They are a test offered by the College Board. Way back when I was in high school, they used to be called achievement tests. Then they were called SAT-2s, and now they're called subject tests. There are about 20 different subject tests that you can choose from. And really at this point, there's only a handful of colleges across the country that are either going to require them or recommend them. And they're typically those very selective, highly selective, I should say, colleges and universities. At this point, though, what you're going to notice is very few of those highly selective colleges even require them, because there's a lot of backlash against the College Board and the ACT for encouraging students to take more tests. They get more money and students get more stressed about it. So make sure you're looking at the language on the websites of these colleges. If they're not required or recommended, do not take these tests. I'd rather students work hard on their classes and having a balanced life in high school. It's not all about taking these tests. Next question, any advice for 7th and 8th graders thinking ahead in Coronado, California? Thank you, you're amazing and provide outstanding information for students and parents. That means the world to me, thank you so much. I actually have an 8th grader, so I appreciate this question, and it's interesting. 10, 20 years ago, we weren't even talking to our 7th and 8th graders about the college admissions process. The interesting thing is I don't want my daughter, who's in 8th grade, to be focused on where she's going to college, but I do want her thinking about the classes she's taking right now in 8th grade and which ones she really enjoys and which ones she feels like she has to work harder, because that's going to be super helpful, not only in where she goes to high school, but also what classes she's going to be placed in starting in 9th grade. Almost every college and university in the country is going to be they're going to be looking at a student's high school transcript from 9th grade on. So what they did in middle school isn't really going to matter in terms of what the admissions officers see, but it can dictate what classes they get into starting in 9th grade. And the classes that you get into 9th grade can affect ultimately what you're able to take by senior year. So for example, if a student is behind in math, let's say that they're taking Algebra 1 in 9th grade, it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to take calculus by senior year. Calculus is one of those really important benchmark classes that a lot of the high achieving students will take to be able to be competitive for those selective, very selective, and highly selective colleges, especially any programs related to STEM. So in my opinion, I'm looking at what classes my daughter is taking, what classes she's excelling at, which ones she enjoys, which ones she needs to work a little bit harder, but also I'm telling her to pay attention to the activities that she's doing. Which ones does she want to continue starting in 9th grade? Because just like with coursework, the activities are really important to be as much as possible. I want the student to try to be consistent. You don't just want to start joining a bunch of clubs in 11th and 12th grade. Ideally, you want to start clubs in 9th grade, and hopefully they're the right fit that you can continue to do them through senior year. Next question. At elite colleges, generally what percentage of the students have one of the following hooks: recruited athlete, development cases connected to the school, URM, that's an underrepresented minority. If you're curious, attend a feeder elite private prep school. Realistically, how many spots are there for public high school kids without special tags? All right, so Rick, I went to a public high school. I was that completely unconnected, untagged, really unsophisticated kid applying to college. And that's why I do what I do. Every piece of information I'm going to pass along is for that regular student. And so the reality is that there is a significant percentage of the freshman class coming in with what I call a tag, that underrepresented background, that well-connected student, the legacy applicant, the recruited athlete, the student whose parents have already given enough money for a building. These are all realities in college admissions. I will say, Rick, that given the admission scandal this past year, Varsity Blues, I have a strong suspicion that there are going to be fewer spots reserved for those students. And so any family that reaches out to me that says, we've got so-and-so advocating for our child because they're a board member, or if we have so-and-so writing a letter because they know the dean of admissions, I can tell you these colleges have to be so careful now with everything that happened with Varsity Blues. But in terms of what percentage of the class, it's really hard to predict. I'm going to say, in my experience, those tag kids probably amount to 20-30% of the incoming freshman class, maybe more depending on the institution. And so these unconnected, these untagged, these regular kids, some of them go to private schools, a lot of them go to public schools around the country. They need to be smart about what they do from 9th grade on, because there are going to be no exceptions. There are going to be, no second chances for these students. It's almost like they've got to make sure that they're doing the right thing from 9th grade on, and that's why we're doing this Facebook Live. It also means to be smart about which colleges you apply to. Make sure that you are competitive, academically speaking, objectively speaking, before you even consider applying to those colleges. Also, you want to be considering rolling admissions programs, which are going to be notifying students on a rolling basis. We have a ton of acceptances already from our Application Nation class of 2020 students. Those students, I encourage them from day one to apply to rolling admission schools, and we're hearing about them on a regular basis. I encourage all students to consider early decision and also early action. Even though the acceptance rates for early action are sometimes similar to the acceptance rates in regular decision, sometimes it's still going to be able to give you an edge in the admissions process. Next question from Rachel. Do you need 4 units total of the core classes, or are colleges looking to make sure students have each of the 5 core classes every single year? My sophomore is taking 2 science classes this year. I get this question a lot. I think someone on the Application Nation discussion boards, we have a couple of them right now, usually ask something like this every single day. So what I tell them is, I have a philosophy, if you can stick to it. It's called the 5-4 plan. And I encourage every single student to try to take all 5 core subjects for all 4 years of high school. So those core subjects would be math, English, science, history or social studies, and foreign language. Now, sometimes it's not even possible for the student to take all 5 core subjects for all 4 years because of a scheduling conflict, let's say, or a student wants to double up in sciences 1 year. But you do want to be careful not to just put one core subject matter in the rear mirror because you just don't like the class. I think it's important to try to stick to that 5-4 plan. The highly selective colleges will say even that it's a minimum requirement, but the fact is most of the students that are going to get admitted to those very selective and highly selective colleges are going to be sticking to that 5-4 plan or very close to it. Next question, my daughter, who is a senior, got a 1550 on the SAT. That's amazing. I probably got half that on the SAT when I took it. 800 Math 2 subject test, amazing, but only got a 680 on the physics subject test. She's in Physics C right now. She's applying to highly selective engineering programs. If science subject test is optional, should she submit the score of a 680? There's so many good questions in here and so many good points in here. So for any engineering student, the most important classes to take in high school would be calculus. The more advanced calculus, the better, like calculus BC or even beyond that. And physics, and the more advanced physics you get, the more prepared you are for this subject test that this parent is asking about. The fact is that the physics subject test is probably the hardest subject test out there, and so if you have more physics under your belt before you go into the test, the better. But there are so few students taking AP Physics C before senior year. So what I would say is if subject tests are optional, and the subject test score is not over a 700 or really a 750 or higher, I probably would not send the score, especially for physics, and she's applying to engineering. That's probably the most important subject test that she's going to take. So I'd rather her leave that off. And because she's in AP Physics C, I'd rather them focus on her taking that class this year. If she has first quarter grades and she's applying to an early decision or early action school that accepts first quarter grades and she got an A in AP Physics C, make sure she sends that along or gets her counselor to send that grade along or all of her grades, especially if they're that strong. Next question from Meryl. If a student is taking AP World History in 10th grade, do you recommend that they take the subject test? Yes, I do, because it's hard to find subject tests by the end of junior year. So I encourage the student, if there is a subject test related to an AP class that they take, it's probably the best preparation. It doesn't mean they don't have to study for the subject test because it's different content on the AP World History exam than the World History subject test, but I do recommend that. She does not know yet what school she wants to apply yet, but would like to aim high. So just to be safe, I would absolutely take the World History subject test at the end of sophomore year. I would encourage her to take it in June because she's going to be taking the AP exam in that subject matter in May, and that's good preparation for it. And you know, these subject tests are so incredibly stressful. And so I tell students not to worry about taking 4 or 5 and maybe not even taking 3. Georgetown's been the one holdout institution for so long. For a very long time, they required 3 subject tests. They've backed off that very strict language now. They're recommending 3 subject tests, but most of the colleges and universities that require or recommend subject tests are only going to be looking for 2, and sometimes if you submit 1, you can still get in. Next question from Allison. Is it acceptable to do interviews and campus tour information session during the same college visit, or should the interview be done on a separate visit later down the road? Okay, so interviews. There are going to be some colleges out there that will offer on-campus interviews. Most of them are my favorite small liberal arts colleges across the country because they have the staff and the ability to do that. Most of the larger universities, even a mid-sized institution, probably isn't going to be able to offer on-campus interviews. But if a college does offer it, it's through the admissions office. A lot of times it's done by an admissions officer or a college senior who is highly respected and regarded by the admissions office. So I would say that if that on-campus interview is offered, I definitely wait. You don't want to do it junior year. I noticed that juniors still need a little bit of time. They're not even sure why they're looking at colleges. Sometimes they're not sure about their academic interests. And sometimes if they wait for the summer between junior and senior year or fall of senior year, that can be more helpful. So if you're planning some college visits, freshman, sophomore, and junior year, and I recommend that you do that actually. You don't want to leave it all for junior year because it's almost impossible to visit all the schools that you want to, and a lot of colleges care about whether or not you visited. They keep track of it because of demonstrated interest. So if you're visiting before senior year or the summer before senior year, I would go through the admissions process, go through the admissions office, do the campus tour information session. And if the student really had a great time and they offer on-campus interviews, I would think about going back for a second time. If you're coming from very far away, it might be something to consider to try to do it all in one fell swoop. Next question, how important is demonstrated interest? It is hugely important for most of the private colleges and universities, and there are even some public universities that pay attention to whether or not a student is interested in them. The best way to show a college demonstrated interest is to do an official campus visit through the admissions office where you sign in. A lot of times you have to register in advance to be able to do it. Do the campus tour and the information session. That is just the basics, and that's going to get you on their radar to make sure that they know that you're interested. There are other ways to show demonstrated interest. You can sign up for a Facebook Live. Some of these colleges do Facebook Live sessions. Sometimes the admissions officer will come visit your high school, especially in the fall of junior or senior year. You can go to one of those presentations. If they collect names or make you sign in, they're keeping track. A college fair is a place where you can meet up with an admissions officer, sometimes an alumni representative, to hear about the college. Usually they make you sign in. But the Ivy League institutions usually aren't looking at demonstrated interest. Some of those other highly selected colleges probably aren't looking for demonstrated interest. However, visiting campus can absolutely help a student when they're writing some of those supplemental essays. There are a lot of supplemental essays out there where the college is asking the student to say and explain why they're interested in their college or university. And if you haven't visited campus, sometimes you don't get a clear sense of that college culture. Next question from Carla. My son is a sophomore and did Spanish 1, 2, and 3. Now he's doing Mandarin online. Do you think it is a good idea? So I would say, first and foremost, try to stick with one foreign language that's offered at the high school, and that's an ideal situation, and try to do that and max out that curriculum as much as you possibly can. There are some students who are really interested in foreign language who want to add on a second language, and maybe they do that online, but I would try to still use that foreign language offered at the high school as kind of their an anchor, because that's going to be offered through the high school. There's a grade, there's a traditional curriculum for that, and some of the online classes are very expensive as well. I would say that students that are changing languages in the middle of high school, it can be challenging when you're applying to a highly selective college. So I'm a bigger fan of trying to possibly add on a second language if you're really interested, and you can do that double language thing at your high school, or you could do that second one online. Just keep in mind, these online classes and online programs can be very, very expensive. There's a lot of discussion right now in the college admissions industry about privilege, and we want to make sure that you're not sending off these messages to colleges and universities and the admissions officers reading the application that you can basically spend money on absolutely anything to go to college. Fact is that if you use your high school curriculum and exhaust the curriculum, that's all that the colleges will expect from you. Leanne has a question. Any suggestions to help STEM students come up with a passion project? My son is interested in theoretical physics, which doesn't lend itself to something that can be demonstrated. Okay, so this parent mentions a passion project. I call it a homegrown project, especially when the student comes up with their own idea. A lot of families are spending a lot of money doing these summer academic programs at all these fancy colleges and universities. Those cost a lot of money. So sometimes those passion projects or those homegrown ideas that come from the students are really the best kind. So if your son has maybe an interest in theoretical physics, I would have him pinpoint exactly what thing he absolutely loves and wants to study, and come up with an idea. And he can reach out to his physics teacher at his high school, see if they can be a mentor. It doesn't mean that that mentor has to do a lot of lifting and a lot of help with the project. Just for your son to bounce ideas off of them. That way it's his project. He can also reach out to a professor at a local college or university as a mentor, but ultimately anything that he can do on his own that can be quantifiable when he's filling out the activities list, that's going to be really helpful. Remember, when you're filling out your activities list, there are things that are going to be asked. They're going to ask, what grade levels did you participate in this passion project? Was it just senior year, or was it sophomore, junior, and senior year? How many hours per week do you devote to it? Is it just an hour per week, or is it 5 or 6, which shows more of a commitment? Did you take this idea and maybe you get an article published? That shows impact. Did you take this idea even further? So the colleges are not just paying attention to, is the student involved with clubs in their community or sports? They want to see a student doing their own thing, and that passion project or homegrown idea is a brilliant one. Next question. What is your opinion on taking CLEP Test junior year? My daughter can CLEP out of freshman basic classes, huge savings. CLEP is never talked about. Yeah, it's never talked about because it probably can be helpful to students who are staying in state and are going to be able to get advanced a little bit faster. But for the more selective colleges, it's probably not something that's going to be factored into the admissions process. And it's something to also keep in mind. Curriculum choices are so important to students. It's not just the grades that they get. Admissions officers are paying close attention not only to the grades from 9th grade on in those core academic classes, but the curriculum as well. And so if the student can handle an advanced level class, they think they can do well in the class and they can handle all of the work involved, I encourage them to do that. But they don't have to take every single AP class that's offered at the high school. They need to do what's right for them. But those more advanced classes, if the student is looking at more selective colleges, AP level classes, honors level classes, and even the IB program is sometimes offered at a high school, those are great opportunities to challenge yourself. But at some high schools, those classes aren't even offered. I worked as a director of college counseling for several years at a private high school, which didn't have any AP classes at all. So it's not about what other high schools are offering students in terms of curriculum choices. It's about the curriculum that's being offered at your particular high school. You're never going to be compared to a student at another high school. Do colleges care about Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts? I'm trying to convince my 10th grade daughter to go for her gold award. Is it worth it? Shannon, it is. So there are some traditional organizations and leadership opportunities that still are highly respected. There are so few girls that stick with Girl Scouts and end up doing the gold award. I would say even fewer of them will do that compared to the boys doing Boy Scouts and getting the Eagle Scout award. And so it really gives them an opportunity to stand out. It shows a long-term commitment. It shows continuity. And that gold award project or that Eagle Scout project is such an opportunity, especially for a student who maybe has a slightly different academic interest or a different extracurricular interest. They can plan that their gold award project or Eagle Scout project is related to that academic or extracurricular passion. And that's key when you're applying to colleges, because you want to show evidence that you are really good at or really passionate about something academic and also something extracurricular. So if she can stick it out, I would love to see her get that gold award. And ideally for those Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts thinking about, whether or not to stick with it, you want to try to get your gold award or your Eagle Scout award before the fall of senior year so that you can list it as an accomplishment on your activities list when you're submitting your applications, because a lot of you are going to be applying to rolling admissions programs sometimes the end of the summer, very beginning of senior year. A lot of you hopefully are going to be thinking about an early decision program. If not, early action programs. Those deadlines sometimes start October 15th or November 1st. So if you get that gold award or Eagle Scout award before that, you can include it in your application. Next question, to add on the language question, if a 9th grader If in ninth grade there are 2 languages as per the school suggestion, Latin and a modern language, and 10th and 11th just 1 modern language, for a total of 4 years of language, does a child still need to take 5th year and 12th grade? Okay, so there are a lot of students who take, let's say, Spanish in middle school. And so when they start ninth grade, they actually a lot of times will start in Spanish 2. And so they'll say, well, I'm taking Spanish 2 in ninth grade, I'm taking Spanish 3 in 10th grade, I'm taking Spanish 4 in 11th grade. That's four years of Spanish, 4 years of a foreign language. Do I really have to take AP Spanish my senior year? No, you don't have to. But it'd be great if you could, because AP Spanish at a lot of high schools is the most advanced level class. So, and back to Latin, you know, there aren't many high schools in this country that still offer Latin. It's very unusual to see it these days. I love when students stick with it. Maybe it's because I married a classics major standing next to me or sitting next to me. Latin is one of those languages that, although it's not modern and it's we're not speaking it, it can really help students in terms of writing and their vocabulary and structuring sentences, and it really can help them with every single academic subject that they take. Next question, is the AP Capstone Diploma now recognized by colleges such that the effort is worth it? So if you were to go on the College Board website and look at the AP Capstone program, you're going to see that a lot of colleges and universities, you know, endorse it or support it. So I think it's an incredible program. It's a 2-year program, usually 1 class as a junior and the 2nd class as a senior. However, I tell students to try not to take those AP Capstone classes. I think 1 is seminar and 1 is research. Try not to replace core academic subject matters for these AP Capstone classes. So for example, at some high schools, a student can take the AP seminar or AP research as their senior year English class, let's say, or their junior year English class. For most of the highly selected colleges, they can say that they support or endorse the AP Capstone program, but they believe strongly that students still need that traditional English class like AP Language or AP Literature or Honors English or College Prep English. That is the most important class that they take. They need it to graduate from high school. And a lot of times colleges don't see eye to eye with the College Board's AP Capstone program. So I think it's great if you have room in your schedule and you're able to handle it. It's an incredible program. It gets you ready for college, but it shouldn't replace those core classes. Next question, does all these completions like Science Olympiad, language competitions, math, unless it's a national placement in those, does it really help? I think it does show a passion and interest for a particular academic interest, but I think you're right. I think a lot of students are doing science fair, doing these math competitions because they think just participating in them is going to be the silver bullet in getting into highly selective colleges. I think if you do incredibly well on the national level at these competitions, it's going to matter a lot more. But I tell students, you don't have to do what everybody else seems to be doing. You know, that student that was really interested in theoretical physics, sure, he could get involved with Science Olympiad, but he's got a lot of competition. If he's doing his own thing and creating original research or doing something incredible that links theoretical physics with something in his community, or writes an article that gets published, that's real impact. And that matters just as much as winning a national award. Next question. I guess to sum up an earlier question, do you see a problem with students going for majors that will result in mountains of debt and no job prospects? You know, this is a hard one because I'm a liberal arts grad. You know, I studied communication, theater, and English in college, and it gave me a great foundation really to be able to do anything. You can go to law school with this, you can go to med school, you could, do anything you want. You could be a writer, and I use these skills every single day. But I think over the last 10 years, there's been a big push from our culture, our society, to go the pre-professional route. I think the pre-professional route can be extremely helpful for a student that knows exactly what they want to do, and they're absolutely positive, although sometimes they do change their minds. But for students who are still trying to figure out what they want to do, or they want to get a broad-based liberal arts education, I think it's okay to give it some time. I do think, though, you can pay attention not just in job placement for a college or university, but also alumni connections, and that's information that should be shared generously on a college's admissions website. If you cannot find information about job placement, that is a sign that the college doesn't have that information available. They don't track it, or the data is not good enough to share. So that's an important data point that families really should be looking at. I think debt is also an important thing to consider. I think it's very hard for any American family to think about spending $60,000 to $70,000 a year. And so look at those colleges and what they offer in terms of need-based financial aid and also merit scholarships. I would say every single family that I work with privately and also through Application Nation, no matter what socioeconomic background they have, they are considering colleges that are going to be giving out generous financial aid and merit scholarships. And merit scholarships can really make this very affordable. We had a mom from last year in one of the original Application Nation groups, and she graduated from, I think, a 5-year combined college and graduate school program with no debt. And her philosophy with her 3 kids is, can we try to figure this out? Can they graduate without debt? And so she really helps us in identifying colleges that give great merit scholarships, because she's done it already with 2 of her 3 kids, but she also is really well versed on the merit scholarships that are being given out to high school students as well. And so sometimes that can be a way to offset the debt, because coming out of college with tens of thousands of dollars of debt, sometimes even more than that, can really put the student behind the 8 ball as they're getting out into the real world. Next question, are ACE and Cambridge University diploma recognized like AP? They are, they're just more unusual, I would say. So ACE is probably more popular in Florida, but yes, these programs are really the most advanced curriculum out there. So I highly encourage the student to take them if they can handle them, but they are quite demanding, just like the IB, the International Baccalaureate Program. Next question. Hey Gladys, good to see your name up here. How about adding Latin 1 to 4 for high school? How useful is it to have 2 languages? I love the student that does 2 languages. When I was reading an application from a student who did 2 languages, I would put in bold, double language. It's great, especially for a liberal arts program or a liberal arts college. It can really be a defining piece of a student's application, especially if they have a clear interest in languages. A student who wants to be a linguistics major, or let's say they want to be a Latin American studies major and they study Portuguese on their own and Spanish at their high school. It's so important when you're thinking about choosing a major to be able to provide the evidence throughout your application, not just in your transcript, but in your extracurricular list and the teachers that write for you and what you mention, especially in those supplemental essays. It's so important to show evidence. So I love a student who is what I would call a double language student. Next question. If the FAFSA shows high family contribution is possible, does this harm a child's ability to receive merit scholarships if they are otherwise highly qualified? Okay, so if you're applying for need-based financial aid, you're going to have to fill out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. There are going to be a number of colleges across the country that will require additional forms like the CSS profile and possibly even an institutional financial aid form. There are highly selective colleges like the Ivy League institutions and a number of other highly selective elite colleges that have what's called a need-aware financial aid program and admissions program, which means that applying for aid is never going to hurt you in the admissions process, but most of these institutions do not offer merit scholarships. There are a lot of colleges out there that do factor in your ability to pay, and sometimes if you are going to need a lot of need-based financial aid, that can actually make it harder for you to get in. In terms of merit scholarships, you want to check in with every college, because as our Application Nation Experienced Financial Aid and Merit Mom has told us, some colleges will stack the scholarships. So let's say you're getting a merit scholarship from a university, but you also get an outside scholarship. Sometimes that will just add on, and it means less money that the family has to contribute. But at some colleges, they will replace it. So if you're getting an outside scholarship, they will say, well, that means that, you don't need as much money coming from us. So you want to look at the individual colleges, look to see if they're need blind, if they're need aware, and how they factor in merit into the admissions process and the financial aid process. Next question. I think we have time for maybe just one more question. What are the top 3 things that selective UCs such as UCLA and UCB look for? So the UC schools, the University of California system has a ton of great campuses all across the state of California. This is a popular question right now in our Application Nation Class of 2020 group because the one deadline for the UC schools is November 30th. They have their own application, so you can't submit the Common App or the Coalition App for it. They have their own application. Remember that these campuses are literally getting sometimes 100,000 applications. These admissions officers are reading these applications very, very quickly. So they have their own way of self-reporting classes and grades. You want to make sure that you have your official transcript right next to you when you're filling out the UC application, because what you put into the application needs to be verified after you've been admitted. And if there are any inconsistencies, your offer of acceptance could be rescinded. So that's number 1. What else are they looking for? Self-reported, test scores. They're looking for the SAT or the ACT. However, still, they're probably one of the only institutions in the country where if you take the SAT, it has to be the SAT with essay, or if you take the ACT, it has to be the ACT with writing. You have more space to fill out the activities list than you do on Common App, for example, where they limit you to 150 characters to describe each activity. That's not 150 words, that's 150 characters. But with the UC activities list, you have a lot more room to explain each activity, but be cautious and thoughtful. These admissions officers are reading these applications sometimes in a matter of 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And so if you're being really long-winded, sometimes they will just glance over it. When it comes to the essays, you have 8 prompts to choose from, and you pick 4 out of the 8, and each essay needs to be 350 words or less. You don't want it to be too short. You don't want it to be 300 words or less. You want to be in that 300 to 350 word range for each of those 4 essays that you write. So good question, and it's very relevant, especially to those high school seniors who are working on their UC application, which is due November 30th. And with a lot of public universities, those deadlines are strict deadlines. So make sure you leave a little extra time to submit that. You don't want to do it right in the last hour of the deadline. You want to make sure that you try to submit that application a couple of days, maybe even a week in advance. And on that note, I think we've got to wrap up. If you like this style, if you like getting answers from me on a regular basis, I encourage you to check out Application Nation. We have several different groups. We have a group for younger students, the class of 2021, 22, and 23. Soon we'll be breaking off that junior class, that current junior class of 2021, and make them their own group, because starting midway through junior year, it gets really, really busy and your questions increase. So I answer your questions on a regular basis through this private Facebook group. I also do video calls every single month, and I celebrate and support you and your child going through the admissions process. And as I said, follow me on Instagram, and especially my story, because every single day we've got acceptances, and you can get a feel for what colleges release decisions early, depending on their deadline. It's a good way to track and keep track of what colleges you might want to apply. Also, we have a number of our students in Application Nation Class of 2020 getting merit scholarships. So that's a good way to indicate, which colleges give out a lot of merit scholarships just by following along on my Insta story. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend, and most of all, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.